Hey everyone, I hope you're well. This is the story about what if Naruto could manipulate shadows. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well. So without any further ado, let's start the what if. Random plane outside of Tensakagai. Tsunade was enraged and in denial at the same moment. Just a moment ago, she saw the beast man tear through Shizune's chest. Intellectually, she knew that she was dead and there was nothing that could be done, but she did not believe that. Shizune was practically her daughter and she couldn't believe that something that bad could have happened to her. She raced over towards the scene, to where the creature had killed her student and was currently wiping her blood off on the back of Shizune's kimono. It was simply too much for her. First Orochimaru shows up whispering false promises in her ear, and she so badly wanted to believe him. But she realized that he was telling lies and put him in his place. Now this strange person shows up with an entourage of dead-looking individuals and a man-beast hybrid in tow. She may have been out of action, but she knew that it was the Kyuubi Jinchuriki that she was fighting. She kept up with the bingo books at least. She didn't expect him to be so strong at such an age. In addition to that, he had two individuals that looked almost exactly like her grandfather and granduncle who had been dead for over 30 years. She had put the fact out of her mind at the moment. She couldn't afford to dwell on something else during a fight. She would try and find out what was happening in that regard later. But now Shizune was hurt very badly, but she didn't want to believe that she was dead. She couldn't believe it. It was like seeing Nawaki or Dan die again, and it tore her up inside. She hid her pain with anger and rage, rushing towards the creature who hurt her surrogate daughter, fist raised and prepared to smash his lion-like head in. "Get away from her, you bastard!" She yelled as she jumped in the air 10 feet away from the calm Absalom, only to feel a sudden tug at her ankle just before she was suddenly pulled back through the air to land on her back about 30 feet away. Jiraiya and Guy wished that they could help, but they were preoccupied with their own fights at the moment. If they tried to attack the beast man or help Tsunade, then they would be attacked from behind. There was nothing they could do. They would have to wait until they won their fights before helping anyone else. Tsunade lay stunned on the ground. Something that felt like a cold, wet, gelatinous rope was wrapped around her ankle. She looked down and saw that there was a tendril of black material wrapped around her limb. That tendril extended toward the reformed shadow of Naruto. She heard Naruto's voice as she quickly grabbed the tendril and got out of its clutches. "Your fight is with me, Tsunade, so I don't recommend turning your back." "Well, technically your fight is with my shadow. It doesn't become a fight with me until you actually manage to hit me." She glanced over at the person in irritation after she stood and got some distance. She had the feeling that she wasn't getting anywhere fighting this shadow, so she would go after the real one. The temporary rush that the soldier pill granted was gone and she was forced to realize that only about 1/5 of her chakra had returned. She would have to use her attacks carefully. She would have to help Shizune later. She wouldn't have a chance to do anything if he was getting in her way. She looked across at the black shape that she had been fighting until now. She wouldn't be able to destroy it, no matter how much she damaged it. Every time she tried, it would simply regenerate. She looked at Naruto, who was watching the battle with a small smile on his face. Attacking him was the only way to win, but to do that she had to get rid of the shadow thing first. That means that she had a very small window to attack him while the shadow regenerated. The shadow shed its human form, becoming a wave that sought to sweep Tsunade away. Knowing that if she got caught by the shadow, she would probably die, she did the smart thing and got out of the way, albeit barely. The shadow returned to a human form and extended its arm, its hand losing its shape and becoming 5 thick tendrils that rushed forward to pierce and strangle her. She dodged the first 3 as they stabbed into the ground, cracking the earth beneath them, and then caught the 4th as it sought to wrap around her neck, and the 5th as it tried to pin her arms to her body. She employed a portion of her great strength and pulled the shadow in. Caught unawares, the shadow went flying into the air, to be met by Tsunade's fist before it popped and had its substance scattered across the field. Tsunade wasted no time. The moment the shadow died, she ran toward Naruto, fist raised. Naruto stayed calm, not even moving. He had run through this scenario in his head. He had done some research into Tsunade and had calculated the amount of chakra that went into her super strength. From there he soon found out just how strong she was and prepared the shadow shield to be able to withstand the blow. Sure enough, as her fist reached down to crush him, the darkness that was once the shadow of the rock he sat on drew up and intercepted the blow. It stretched, but soon Tsunade was bounced back by the flexible nature of the shadow. Tsunade was irritated, but she did not give up. When it came to piercing defenses, she had just what was required. She ran forward again, fist raised once more. Only this time, there was something different. Naruto watched happily as Tsunade attempted another futile punch. It's quite hopeless. That shield was prepared to take her strikes without being penetrated. I don't know why she doesn't just give up. Naruto's smile vanished as Tsunade's fist tore straight through the shield and came rocketing towards his head. Tsunade's attack would have worked, if it hadn't been for one thing. The fact that Naruto's shadow had regenerated. While it was manifested, it was almost impossible to hurt Naruto. While it was manifested and in human shape, Naruto could use the Kageyusha and escape any attack. If it was not in human shape, then the technique could not be performed, but it was in human shape and Naruto escaped the attack. Tsunade's fist slammed into the shadow again, and it popped once more, splattering the ground like small pools of liquid tar. Naruto's mind was racing. How the hell did she do that? That shield should have stopped her punches, no matter how much chakra she put into them. There's only one explanation: my calculations are off. There must be some variable that I am not yet aware of, and that tipped the scales in her favor. I will have to look into this and see if there is anything that I can do to stop it from happening again. But if it's something that I can't stop, then this little game will have to come to an end. Tsunade wasted no time in rushing Naruto again. Long-range combat was not something she wanted to get caught up in. She had next to nothing when it came to long range. She did the same thing that she did before to pierce his shield, but hit time. Naruto was watching carefully, and he caught on to what she did. Naruto saw what was happening and immediately knew that it wasn't something that he could stop short of completely locking her down. He just muttered "Soru" under his breath and vanished, appearing 10 feet in front of Tsunade. "So, that's your secret, Tsunade," he said as his eyes locked onto her. Now that she provided a slight threat, she wasn't going to last much longer. The only reason that she really lasted this long was because she was so impotent that she couldn't do much to defend herself. "What are you talking about, brat? Almost everyone knows the secret behind my strength. The only reason it hasn't been copied is because it's much easier said than done." Naruto smirked just a little and said, "Not that, I was referring to your addition to your attack to pierce my shield. I never would have guessed that you would have a Raiton affinity. That's quite rare, especially in Konoha. Then again, it explains how you came up with your Ranshinshu technique. I doubt that you could create an electric field to disrupt your opponent's nervous system without a Raiton affinity." Tsunade was suddenly on guard. She didn't expect him to realize what she did so quickly. By changing her chakra into lightning chakra and using that instead of the normal stuff in her punches, it gave it the penetration needed to get through the shield. After all, when it came to penetrating defense, Raiton was the way to go. But now that he knew what she did, he would quickly find a way to counter it. She would probably have to think up a new plan of attack. However, there was a downside to the strategy. Simply put, it cut down her chakra supply quickly. It takes chakra to turn normal chakra into lightning chakra, resulting in a smaller amount of a stronger product. So the lightning punches took up a lot more chakra than the normal ones. Currently, she had enough chakra left for 2 more such lightning strikes, and then she would be done for. Out of chakra, out of options, and out of luck. Her only option was to finish him quickly, using her remaining chakra to the best possible extent. She would destroy the shadow again and then do her best to hit him. Naruto smiled again after a second as he said, "Let me guess, you're intending to destroy my shadow again and then come after me, hoping to finish me off in one blow, right?" Tsunade jumped at the suddenness and accuracy of the statement. Could he read her mind? Could he read her well enough to know what she was thinking? Or did he simply consider her resources and think of how he would use them in her situation? Either way, he caught on to her plan almost as soon as she thought it up, and that did not bode well for her. Naruto saw the steely determination in her eyes and smiled again. Are you still planning to try it even though I know what you're going to do? If I were you, I would simply give up, accept the inevitable. But if you want to go out with a bang, I won't try and stop you. It is your last act after all, it should be at least a little memorable. Go ahead. In fact, I'll make things a little simpler for you. As he said that, the shadow finished reforming, only to jump away and sit on a nearby rock. There, he said, my shadow will not interfere, go ahead and do your worst. Tsunade ground her teeth together in sheer irritation. How dare this brat make fun of her? She was Tsunade, one of the most powerful ninja in the world. She ran forward, ready to deal a mortal blow to her enemy. Naruto waited until she was 5 feet away before saying, "Soru," and vanishing. He reappeared inches in front of Tsunade, one fist held back. Then he said, "Jugen, Aurin," and brought his fist forward. As it moved though, it seemed to blur, looking as though he had more than one forearm attached to his elbow. That arm collided with Tsunade's midsection, and she went flying back as she let out a small cry of pain. Naruto straightened himself and said to Tsunade, "I said to give me the worst you could do, I never said that I wouldn't defend myself." Then, he started walking forward. Tsunade landed roughly 10 feet away from where she got punched. She only had to feel her midsection to know that several ribs were broken at the least. She had no idea what happened. It looked like he only punched her once, but she felt several different injuries. In other words, her thoughts were pretty much what the fuck just happened. Naruto walked forward calmly as Tsunade started to regain awareness of something other than the pain in her abdomen. He loved that move. Several dozen strikes all performed in under a second. Mind you, they all had to be delivered to a rather small area. His hand moved so fast that it looked like it was in several places at once. That would explain why it was the second most powerful form of the Sharingan. Tsunade finally got up, only to find herself staring into Naruto's eyes as he kicked her teeth in. Her head snapped back and blood dribbled from her mouth as she quickly got up, albeit more slowly than usual thanks to her fractured ribs. She leapt back while Naruto watched and blood dribbled from her mouth. She could feel that one or two of her teeth were loose. She was in some severe trouble and she knew it. She couldn't take another of those hits and hope to get up, much less continue to fight. If she was fresh, at full strength, then she would give this bastard a run for his money, but he attacked her when she was at her weakest, and it was showing. She moved her battered body into a defensive taijutsu stance, ready for his next attack. Or at least she thought she was. With Tsunade this weekend, she was easy prey for a Jonin, much less Naruto himself. There was no guarantee that she would survive any of his attacks. Naruto smiled and shook his head at her insistence to go on, to continue to fight. He found it rather amusing, but still, business was business as far as he was concerned. Naruto used another Soru and vanished. He appeared beside her, much to her surprise. She attempted to backhand him with her left arm, but he grabbed her shoulder, where the chakra was least concentrated so he wouldn't have his hand ripped off, and that was that, she was cut off from her chakra. Tsunade wasn't sure what happened just then. He grabbed her arm and all of a sudden, she didn't have chakra anymore. It was a strange feeling, to not have chakra, to not feel its energy flowing through her. It was a feeling she hadn't had since she began the academy over 40 years ago, before she even knew what a jutsu was and her grandfather took her to school every day. She was fighting with very little, but now she might as well have been a civilian for all the good her ninja knowledge would do her now. The moment Naruto grabbed Tsunade, he pulled her forward and with his right hand landed 2 quick and painful punches to her kidneys, then placed his hand on her stomach and utilizing his grip on her left arm in conjunction with the upward force provided from his right hand, lifted her over his left shoulder and slammed her into the ground, turning as he did so. Naruto put his left foot under Tsunade and flipped her over while she was still stunned, so that she was on her stomach. He removed his sword from his right sleeve, moving into his left hand as he stepped upon her wealth of blonde hair and placed the blade on the back of her neck. Tsunade, who had been starting to move, immediately froze as she felt the cold metal upon her skin. Naruto smiled at the downed Sannin. He could feel it, she had some fight left, enough for 2 more of those defense-piercing punches, but she couldn't move. Because she knew that if she moved, he would cut through her spine. He simply said, "I must admit, I expected more for a person of your level, but I attacked you when you are tired, so perhaps I should have expected a mere exercise rather than a challenge. Oh well. Farewell, Senju Tsunade, say hello to Shizune for me." Then he raised his blade, intending to cut down and behead the Kunoichi and Hokage-to-be, but he snapped his blade to the right, to intersect a kunai that had pierced the shadows that rose to stop it, and was aiming right at his neck. It took Naruto less than a second to realize who threw it based on its direction and chakra content. It was filled to the brim with a potent fire chakra. It must have been Guy. He saw the situation and did his best to help Tsunade despite his fight, charging a kunai with his fur element chakra that he knew would penetrate his shield and tossed it with deadly precision. Sadly for Guy, Naruto's reflexes were sharp. He caught the blade out of the corner of his eye and faintly felt the chakra as it sped toward him in time to maneuver the blade to deflect it, fast as a striking snake. Sadly, reflexes don't count for much with a point-blank strike. Tsunade took her opportunity. She heard the clang of the metal in the air and knew that this was her last chance. There are no chakra coils in the hair, so despite the fact that Naruto was in contact with it, her chakra wasn't cut off. She placed a full charge of lightning chakra into her right hand and delivered a powerful punch roughly where his right knee should have been, the one that was stepping upon her hair close to the scalp to keep her in place. Her fist, lightning charged, pierced through the shadows that rose to defend like a bullet through tissue, and her fist came into contact with Naruto's right knee, punching it in sideways. Several strange crackling sounds came from the joint. Naruto screamed. He couldn't help it. His lower leg was bent in roughly the opposite direction from where it should have been, and it hurt like the intense fury of 1,000 suns. The generals heard it, Guy heard it, Jiraiya heard it, Absalom heard it, and Haku heard it. Naruto, for the first time, had been grievously injured. He was distracted and struck out of nowhere. With Naruto's leg no longer holding her down, Tsunade rolled out from under the unwillingly suspended limb and jumped away, toward the downed Shizune. Naruto immediately used the Kageyusha and replaced with his shadow. He sat down on the rock immediately to take pressure off of the badly injured leg and shouted to it, "Kill her! Kill her now!" The shadow obeyed, rushing forward at immense speeds, shifting from human shape to dozens of large bats that flew through the air at a faster pace and quickly caught up to Tsunade. They joined together into 3 shapes that became gigantic wolves that bore down upon the wounded Sannin. Haku and Absalom also raced towards the Sannin. Naruto examined his leg quickly and with a critical eye. He did his best to ignore the pain as he examined it. Quite simply, it was bad. His right kneecap punched straight through the joint between thigh bone and shin bone and was pressing into the underside of the skin on the inside of his knee joint. The lower leg was forming a 100-degree angle with his thigh and pointing slightly to the left, held into the air thanks to the reversed kneecap. His leg joint was effectively crushed. What was worse was that he couldn't use the demonic chakra to heal it completely. There was a limit to the healing factor of a Jinchuriki. Healing flesh wounds and the like was fine, even some organs, but healing complex joints was not a good idea. If some tendon went into the wrong niche, he didn't even want to think about it. He would have to have Hogback do some surgery when he got back. Tsunade faced the 3 oncoming shadow wolves, long black fangs poised to tear into her flesh and rend it from the bone. She timed it well, and brought up her left leg, smashing through the wolves with a lightning-enhanced strike, keeping the power to minimum to conserve energy. She had about enough for one last weakened attack at this point. The 3 wolves splattered into several dozen pools of black liquid that rained upon the ground. She spotted the rock where Naruto was sitting and immediately took action. She picked up a dozen of the 100 or so kunai that littered the battlefield and put all the lightning chakra she had left into them before letting them fly in Naruto's direction, all of them aiming at his head, neck, and heart. Haku went into action. She drew her needles and let them fly toward the kunai coming toward the man who saved her life. The problem was her position. She had placed herself to be equidistant from the 3 fights, so that she could get to any of them quickly should she be needed. And even with her sudden sprint, there was significant distance between her and the projectiles, and the kunai would travel faster than her needles thanks to Tsunade's superior strength. Her needles flew, but they knocked down 3 or 4 of the 12 knives. Naruto saw the knives incoming, and he knew that they were lightning charged. He also knew that he couldn't walk or run out of the way. His shadow was still reforming itself, so he couldn't use Kageyusha to escape. One would think that he was screwed. One would be wrong. There were 6 techniques in the Rokushiki style. So far, he had only shown 5: Shurgan, Renkyaku, Soru, Jeppu, and Tekai. Now it was time for the 6th Rokushiki art to be revealed. Naruto stood, shakily, standing on only his left leg as he faced the knives. It was necessary for him to be standing for this to effectively work. As the knives entered a distance of 5 feet, he muttered under his breath, "Kami." The first knife soared right between his eyes, but it passed through him. There were suddenly 2 torsos, one standing upright, the other, still connected to the waist, leaning to the side. The second and third knives were to take him through the stomach. A third torso appeared, a flicker of movement between the second and third, bending over at a 90-degree angle to his waist and avoiding the knives. This continued, flickers of movement leaving after images in the air as he bent quickly at normally insane angles, avoiding all of the knives. The 6th Rokushiki technique, Kami, the ultimate dodge. Naruto, panting, sat back down. Using a Rokushiki technique in his condition was unwise, but it was better than being killed. However, even injured, he could still finish his fight. Naruto's shadow reformed itself once more, and he decided to pull out the second most powerful of his shadow techniques. As Naruto's shadow became a single piece again, he used his chakra and channeled it through the shadow through their bond, giving it what it needed to do what he wanted it to do. As the shadow moved toward Tsunade, he simply muttered, "Kage Kakusei." Tsunade became aware of a presence behind her and turned to see the shadow rushing toward her. She saw Naruto dodge the kunai and was amazed. She simply decided to get Shizune's body and get out of there, simply hoped that Jiraiya and Guy got out all right. But it looked as though she wouldn't be getting out of the fight that easily. Even crippled, he was still attempting to stop her. She took a swing at the shadow, no chakra in the blow, but hoping that pure physical strength might have been enough. The shadow, however, did not dive toward her like she expected, but dived into the ground. Or, to be more precise, it dived into Tsunade's shadow. Tsunade looked around for the shadow, not knowing where the hell it went. Then she felt a tug at her arms, and to her horror, she found her arms being drawn behind her back by an invisible force. She was being forced to her knees by this same, invisible force. She tried to resist, but her muscles simply wouldn't obey her. Naruto wasn't exactly lucid at this point, but he muttered how the technique worked under his breath. The shadow must hold the same shape as the substance it copies. This is a law of nature. The shadow is forced to copy the movements exactly. Kage Kakusei reverses that law of nature, forcing the substance to copy the movements of its shadow, no matter what form it takes. I could rearrange the shadow to become circular, and the person would twist and fold into a ball. I could shrink the shadow and they would also shrink. One oddity is that no matter how much the person is twisted or bent, no damage will come to them. It's quite strange. However, the shadow of the target must be possessed by my own shadow to do it, as my shadow overpowers the shadow of the target and forces it to move as I will it. You cannot resist. The only way to get out of it would be for your shadow to overpower mine, and that will never happen. No matter how strong the body is, the shadow is still weak. My shadow is not weak, it can overpower any other shadow. This technique also explains why people, once they have their shadows removed, dissolve in sunlight. They must follow the movements of their shadow. If their shadow is nothing, then so are they. Mind you, nobody heard this little speech. The pain was simply too much for him and his mind was being affected. That and shock was starting to set in. He had never been hurt like that before and it was taking a whole bunch of tolls. Mind you, it wouldn't stop him from killing Tsunade now that he was royally pissed. He raised his right hand and pointed a single finger at Tsunade. Darkness coalesced at his fingertip. It resembled nothing more than a man-sized ball of solid black smoke so dark that light seemed to dim around it, constantly shifting and moving as it floated in the air. He moved his finger, a little jerky motion in Tsunade's direction, and the sphere zoomed in her direction. Naruto watched happily, breathless in anticipation for the violent method of death that the sphere of darkness would ensure its victim. The sphere moved quickly, hurrying to Tsunade, to embrace her, and to bring an end to her life. However, while it was in motion, something else could come in contact with the sphere and take Tsunade's place as the victim. Jiraiya took his chance. He had been fighting the two generals for some time now and had been fighting defensively, managing to get in a few blows that actually should have killed a normal man. The Shodame's throat was cut, for example. However, no matter what damage he dealt them, they simply got up again and continued fighting, not bothered in the slightest unless he did something like shatter a bone, but even that didn't slow them down much. He could only last so long, but now Jiraiya had a method to do some damage to one of them. He doubted that the Sphere of Darkness was victim-friendly in whatever it did, and he was going to take advantage of that. Jiraiya had one major trump card that no other ninja in the world had, the ability to take in and use natural energy. Natural energy came with several side effects, such as becoming a frog if you OD on it. But it had several advantages too. It allowed muscle enhancement over 100 times what was possible with normal chakra. However, he could barely control Sage Chakra, so he used it rarely, and even then always having help from the Toad Elders. This time, he did not have such help. Jiraiya took in natural energy and formed Sage Chakra in his right arm. His arm turned bumpy and green as he did so. He had not mastered this art yet. But still, for a time, a punch from that arm would make one of Tsunade's punches look like a love tap. And he brought it all square into the Nidame's jaw. You could hear the snap as tendons ripped and bones snapped in two just before the Nidame went flying through the air. He moved quickly through the air, and before the Nidame or Naruto could even process what happened, the dead Hokage slammed into and was enveloped by the Sphere of Darkness. Almost immediately, Jiraiya collapsed, exhausted of his last energy, and simply unable to go on anymore. He had gone past his limit to last this long, and he simply didn't have anything else to offer. Almost immediately after the Nidame made contact, the sphere stopped. There was a quick flash of purple light from inside of the sphere, and several liquids poured from the sphere, forming an immense puddle on the ground. The sphere dispersed and a small sphere the size of a man's knuckle fell to the ground. That was what was left of the Nidame. The sphere took in an object and pressed in with gravity on all sides, crushing the person to the point where their body liquids are forced from their body, and the body itself was crushed and condensed to the size of a small rock. Even a general could not survive that. Well, technically it was still alive, the shadow was still animating it, but what good was a general when their brains, bones, muscles, and internal organs are all crushed into paste, and that paste is condensed to a rock-hard blob the size of a hazelnut? Naruto, Absalom, and Haku were shocked. A general had been killed. Not just put out of action or immobilized, but killed, eternally perished. One of their elite forces had been defeated, indirectly true, but it was Jiraiya who managed to do it, and turned Naruto's strength against them. Naruto just growled out, "Damn it." Then after a second he yelled, "Absalom, take her down." Absalom looked over at Naruto and then looked over to Tsunade, still there, still helpless. He grinned as he raised his right hand and fired a single blast straight toward the downed Sannin, ending this once and for all. Jiraiya was beaten, Shizune was dead, and Tsunade was about to be killed. Guy realized all of this, and used the only card he had left. He opened the gates. Well, to be specific, he opened more of the gates. He had already used the Omote Renge upon Ryuma, and opened the second gate, the Kyumon, as well after the zombie got up. Now he opened the third gate, in desperation. Everyone heard his voice as he yelled, "Hashiman Tonku! Sanmon, Simon Ki!" Guy's skin turned red as the concentrated chakra burst from his body, the intensity of it blowing back Ryuma several feet. The world seemed slower to the man as he raced toward the downed Sannin, rushing past everyone as he scooped her up and moved out of the way of the incoming blast. He was tossed forward, but he kept his footing as he raced onward, towards Naruto. Naruto looked at his former teacher in shock. He did not expect this. He thought that Ryuma would have rendered him incapable of using the gates before he got into a bad enough situation to warrant their use. Indeed, there were several deep cuts on Guy's body, several over key muscles, but they only slowed him down a bit while he was under the influence of the immense strength given to him by opening the Hashiman. Naruto's shadow left Tsunade's and sought to attack Guy, but the man effortlessly dodged in a flash of blinding speed, and with a single kick, sliced the shadow in half down the middle. The shadow fell to the ground and lost human form as it seeped together to reform into a single piece, but by that time it made no difference. Naruto was in Guy's path, and the taijutsu master rushed forward, jumping into the air. You could see the flaming aura around his leg as he jumped into the air and brought a powerful kick to his former student's side. The fiery chakra let his leg burn through the shadow shield, and his leg continued straight to the side of Naruto's head. The boy yelled, "Tekai," at the last moment, and his muscles and skin hardened to become a suit of organic armor, but Guy's kick still damaged him regardless. Naruto went flying to the side, skidding on the ground twice, before coming to a stop when he hit a large rock. The dust settled and Naruto lay there, defeated, and out cold. "Master!" yelled the zombies and Absalom. "Naruto Kun!" yelled Haku as they all rushed to the fallen youth slash. The shadow, with its master's loss of consciousness, fell to a puddle of dark slime, slithering over the ground to Naruto's feet where it became a shadow once more. Guy didn't stop there, he ran over to Jiraiya, fast as lightning, and picked up the unconscious old man, and even managed to get to Shizune's body. Then he headed west running as fast as he could, and opening the fourth gate as he did so, and then the fifth as he made his escape. Guy lamented on his decision as he ran. He could have killed Naruto with that blow. If he had struck a few inches lower, he would have broken his neck and probably killed him. But he simply couldn't do it. The boy was once his student, and some part, deep down, that held hope for him just wouldn't let him do the deed. He hesitated and knocked him out instead. He would be out for a while, but he would be okay in the end. But he promised himself that he would not be so lenient next time. Even if he was once his student, Guy could not allow such a danger to exist. He would not hesitate next time. Guy ran toward Konoha at superhuman speeds, opening each successive gate as the former one ran dry on energy, eventually opening the seventh as he rushed through the gates of Konoha several hours later and collapsed before the Anbu guards, utterly exhausted. Hogback's lab. Perona and Haku waited in a room outside of Hogback's lab as the doctor did his work. In fact, Absalom was waiting there too, as was Ray and Hilden. All of the conscious zombies were there, waiting to see the fate of their master, who had been gravely hurt. All except Kage, who was working as Hogback's assistant. Perona was quite hostile toward Haku and Absalom, claiming that if they had done their jobs right, Naruto wouldn't have been hurt so bad. Haku blamed herself for the injuries as well, thinking that she could have changed the outcome somehow. She couldn't have changed a thing once Guy opened the gates, but that didn't stop her from taking the responsibility. They had gathered around Naruto and used the necklaces to open a way back to the cave system. They also brought back the crushed Nidaime, albeit with difficulty. The sphere was small, but dense. It had the same weight of the zombie before it was compressed. They immediately brought him to Hogback and the doctor got to work. This was several hours ago. An hour later, Hogback left the lab as he pulled down his mask. He was immediately assaulted by everyone there, barraged with questions, the foremost one being, "Is he alright? Quiet down, quiet down. Honestly, I can understand the excitement, but keep calm." "Yes, he's fine, bedridden, but fine. Some major trauma to his leg to say the least, and a small case of chakra exhaustion, and some head trauma which I fixed up easily enough. He's conscious and alright, but no visitors." The crowd immediately stopped trying to get into the room as Hogback continued, "He needs his rest and it will be several days before his leg if fully healed, even with the demon chakra speeding up the process. The whole thing is a delicate process, and he cannot be bothered right now. Nobody enters that room except Kage and myself." Understood. Hogback had no combat prowess whatsoever, but he was the head doctor of the organization and they listened to him. He was one of the three, and all zombies were to obey his commands without question. Temari and Enko were also under his authority. Perona and Absalom, being the other two members of the inner circle, did not have to obey him normally, but on a medical matter they too were forced to yield. They would get their chance, so they filed out of the room, albeit reluctantly. Hogback turned to his assistant Kage as she left the room. "Kage-chan, guard this door and make sure that no one enters but you or me, and call me if Naruto-sama calls." "Understood." She nodded. Good, now then, I am going to get some sleep. The doctor walked off and Kage began her vigil. Inside the room, however, Naruto was pissed. Guy had thwarted his assassination attempt and now he was stuck in a bed until his leg healed. If he had not distracted him with the kunai, he would have killed Tsunade. Before, Guy was a potential general frame or shadow, not to be killed until ordered otherwise. That had changed. Now, anyone who worked for Naruto would kill Guy on sight. Guy would not escape from wounding him unpunished, he would make sure of it. Guy would pay, and he would make it extremely painful. Kanahagakure, hospital. The Konoha medical staff were working overtime. They had 3 critically important patients to take care of, all in severe condition. Mato Guy had a severe case of chakra exhaustion, several torn muscles and broken bones, and dozens of cuts, varying in severity. There were some that were only scratches, and there were others that went several inches deep. He also had some mild blood loss. Jiraiya was just as bad, if not worse. A severe case of chakra exhaustion, several broken ribs, several bones in his foot were broken, along with several cuts on various parts of his body. To make things worse, there was a cut very close to his spine that had apparently caused some severe nerve damage, possibly due to some kind of electric shock. There was a very real possibility that he wouldn't be able to walk, or would be impaired for quite some time. Then there was the fact that his old wound had opened up again, and they had to work hard and quickly to make sure that it didn't get infected. They had him under constant observation, and received several treatments every 6 hours, and was also on an 4 drip. He was in critical condition. Worst of all was Tsunade. The Hokage-to-be was put through some pretty severe trauma. Several of her ribs were broken in the fight and during Guy's sprint, one of them had actually punctured her lung, and another punctured her stomach wall, allowing acid to leak from it, further damaging things. To make things worse, she had severe chakra exhaustion, and her natural healing factor was lower because of it. Several of her muscles were torn and she had several fractures in her jaw and right hand. In fact, several of her knuckles were dislocated, and her wrist was broken. They surmised that she used one of her punches and didn't put enough chakra into it, resulting in damaging herself. They couldn't be sure if she would be able to use her hand to its full effect again. She was still in surgery for her ribs and lungs. They weren't sure if she would make it or not since some of the hydrochloric acid from her punctured stomach got to her heart. Lee and Niji were waiting in Guy's room. The Hyuga Genin had gotten his jaw healed, although he was to be careful not to damage it for a while. The two weren't sure what had happened to the 3, but they knew, or thought they knew, who did it. Naruto, why have you done such things, my comrade? Why did you leave us? Lee thought. Naruto's HQ, Naruto's room. Unlike Guy, Jiraiya, and Tsunade, Naruto was doing rather well. Perhaps it was because he had a better doctor, perhaps it was the demonic chakra, but he was awake, and holding court. He was getting things back under control now that events had calmed down a little. He had ordered Hogback to start reproducing their viruses. They still had all of the techniques and methods to create the viruses, and the means to study and improve them. He had also considered which general to animate next. Yes, the Nidaime was defeated, but he was not dead. The shadow still resided in the compressed blob that Naruto turned him into. All he had to do was remove the shadow, and put it in a new corpse, and he had a new general zombie. Perhaps a slightly weaker one, but it didn't truly make much of a difference. Unlike his opponents that day, his injuries were simple and uncomplicated. He had some severe damage to his right knee, but that would be healed in the next few days thanks to Kyubi. Once Hogback set everything in its proper place, Kyubi would start the healing process and get everything back in order. He would be back on his feet in a few days, if not sooner. What he was more worried about was the new location of his HQ. He had the location picked out, and from what Kyubi told him, her idea would be absolutely ideal. When he got back on his feet, he would go there, and then he would move his entire operation there, leaving nothing behind but a few deadly traps to keep the Akatsuki company when they finally came calling. He was currently holding council with Absalom and Perona, who were wondering what they were going to do now that Tsunade would soon become Hokage. His right leg was in a cast and he was in sleeping clothes as he listened. Naruto-sama, what are we going to do now that that bitch will become Hokage? If she does, then Konoha will stabilize and will start to grow again. Perona nodded and said, he's right Naruto-kun, and we have to decide on which general to animate next. We'll have to decide carefully on which one would be best with Raiga's shadow. Naruto just smiled at the two as he said, as for the general zombie, we can pick at our leisure. The shadow isn't going anywhere. As for Tsunade, don't worry about her, it's all taken care of. Perona looked at him, somewhat puzzled, how is it taken care of? Your plan failed. Naruto's smile grew cold as he said, yes, it did, but this one won't. Do you really think that I haven't planned for the possibility that I would lose? I always have 3 plans my dear for every operation, a plan, a backup plan, and an ace in the hole. Tsunade survived the first plan, but she won't survive the second. Absalom smiled and said, that's more like the Naruto-sama I know. What do you have planned? Naruto's smile widened as he said, I'm glad you asked. He reached over to the side of his bed and from the bedside table picked up a small suitcase, which he handed to Absalom. Absalom, inside that case you will find a square metal box and 2 detonator switches. You are to carry out my backup plan since I am unable at the moment. Absalom looked at him in shock and said, you want me to plant a bomb in Tsunade's room? That's crazy, even I wouldn't be able to get in there, they would hear me for sure. Naruto laughed at that, like he would send Absalom to do something like that. Hahaha, very funny Absalom, but no, your mission is much simpler. The metal box in that case is something called an EMP that I built a few weeks ago. It will completely knock out anything electronic within a 500-yard radius. I want you to put it in Konoha's power plant and set it off there. That will knock out the power plant and put all of Konoha in darkness. They're bound to have Tsunade on a respirator of some kind given the damage I dealt her. Without it, she'll die, it's as simple as that. Absalom looked in the case and saw that there was a blue-colored metal sphere, and one of the detonators had a blue button covered with a plastic cap. Remove the cap, press the button. Absalom looked up and said, what's the red detonator for? Naruto leaned back a bit and maneuvered a bit to get more comfortable in the bed. Perona got up and fluffed the pillow behind his head for him. Thank you Perona-chan. As for the red detonator Absalom, that's the second part of the plan. You see, in the event of a blackout, several key buildings have backup generators that will provide the building with power for 72 hours. The hospital is one of these buildings. Before I left Konoha, I planted several explosives upon this generator in the case that I ever had to kill someone hospitalized and too difficult to get to. I contemplated using this on Jiraiya when he was there, but I decided against it. Take out the secondary generator and Tsunade will die. Naruto smiled again and said, and even if my plan doesn't work, I still win. My ace in the hole plan is guaranteed to kill Tsunade, it will just take out more people than I would want to kill with her. Hence, why it's the ace in the hole and not the backup plan. But the beauty of this EMP Absalom is that it doesn't just knock out anything electronic, it completely destroys it, making it inoperable forever. Do you see what this means? By setting it off in Konoha's power plant, you'll completely destroy any means they have of creating electricity. Many people in Konoha have become accustomed to lights, air conditioning, working refrigerators, and working appliances. This will severely hurt the people's morale, particularly the civilians. To make things worse, they would have to build an entirely new power plant to replace the destroyed one, and that will take a gigantic chunk out of Konoha's already floundering finances. If things keep going like this, with large expenditures, not much money coming in, low morale, and a good portion of the village destroyed, people will become more desperate, more miserable. This will put Konoha in a bad light in the eyes of customers, and they will still lack a Hokage. Slowly but surely, missions will taper off until they are unable to pay their debts, and wages are cut for shinobi, causing increasing incentive to go rogue. Whether or not Tsunade dies, Konoha will end up going bankrupt. Perona looked at him with admiration. Naruto-kun, coming up with something like that, you're amazing. Naruto waved her away but smiled genuinely as he said, there's more than one way to skin a cat and more than one way to destroy a ninja village. If I can't incite war, then I attack them financially, if that doesn't work, then I attack them some other way. It's a simple enough concept. Absalom, you had better get going, Tsunade won't be on life support forever. Absalom nodded and said, but, how am I to get to Konoha in time? Do you have a beacon gem near Konoha? Naruto chuckled and said, of course I do, it's hidden in the trees of Training Ground 20, the one used by the first-year academy students for practicing taijutsu. You had better get going. Absalom nodded and left the room. After he left, Perona turned to Naruto and said, so, Naruto-kun, where are we going to go after you heal? I'm really interested. Naruto leaned back and said, I don't know, but according to Kyubi the place is perfect for my needs. Do you know what's funny? When I asked her why she hadn't told me of the place before, she said, I've been alive for over 10,000 years, you can't expect me to remember everything all the time. Perona laughed at the retelling. Naruto closed his eyes and said, now then Perona-chan, if you don't mind I'm going to try and get some sleep. The sooner my leg gets healed the better. Perona nodded and got up before walking to the door, and silently walking out, silently closing the door behind her. With Absalom. Absalom emerged from a portal of darkness, created through the power of the necklace Naruto gave him. He immediately turned invisible when he had stepped from the safety the darkness provided, and with good timing. There was a class practicing taijutsu not 30 feet away. Absalom glanced at the tree where the portal had disappeared and saw the gem that Naruto placed there. It was small, and entirely black, embedded deep into the bark. It did not reflect any light that was cast on it whatsoever. It would be very difficult to find if you didn't already know where it was. It also helped that it was about 7 feet from the ground, so most academy students couldn't hope to spot it in any of their explorations. Absalom kept silent and prowled away through the trees, heading for the elevated spot near the Hokage monument that housed the power plant. He walked plainly through the streets, and nobody noticed him at all. Most of the powerful ninja were either on guard duty at the hospital or on high-ranking missions to stimulate the village's falling economy. That invasion truly took its toll. Reconstruction efforts were anything but cheap. There were a few close calls, such as when he almost ran into a ninja coming around a corner suddenly, and there was a time when he stepped on a twig in the street near a small bar that catered to the shinobi populace. But overall, he did extremely well at mobbing around undetected. He made sure to avoid the hospital though, even if it did provide a faster route to the power plant. A few streets from the hospital though, he saw a rather odd sight. A girl with pink hair was complaining to a blue-eyed blonde girl who didn't seem to be paying any attention at all to what the girl was saying, but the pink-haired one either didn't notice or loved her own voice to the point where she didn't care if people listened or not. Can you believe that they wouldn't let me visit Sasuke-kun? He's under heavy guard and can't be disturbed, he is resting and cannot be bothered, who cares about that stuff? They shouldn't stand in the way of true love, I should be allowed to see him at least. Don't you think so, Ino? The blonde girl nodded absently and the pink-haired one carried on. Absalom shook his head in disbelief. That pink one was annoying as hell. That blonde though? No, he chided himself, I'm here on business, strictly business. I can't go looking for some tail right now. Naruto-sama would turn me into his dinner. He got going, moving quickly away from the pair. Eventually, Absalom reached the power plant. The guard on the place was abysmal. There were 2 Chunin guards standing on either side of the gate, and that was it. There wasn't even an electrified fence. The plant itself wasn't too impressive. It was a large amount of machines in a large, fenced-in area. Numerous wires traveled from the place to circle around Konoha's various buildings. It did its job, but it wasn't pretty to look at. The guards were no trouble to the amalgam of man and beast. He knocked one of them over the head with the metal suitcase he carried, for the guard to drop to the ground, unconscious. The other guard turned suddenly to see what the noise was, only to have a strong hand close around his throat and hold him against the fence until he passed out. Neither of them knew what happened since Absalom kept himself invisible during the quick assault. Absalom put the other guard down and after a moment of preparation jumped the fence, landing gracefully on the other side. He strode to the middle of the small complex and put down his cargo, flicking open the case and pulling out the detonators. Absalom backed up a bit and flicked over the plastic cap on the red detonator, the bomb switch. He had to trigger that one first because the EMP would knock out the detonator as well. He put his thumb over the button on the top of the cylinder of metal and pushed the bump of red rubber. The hospital. In the basement of Kanehagakure General Hospital, there was a large power generator. No one came down there except the janitor who kept his supplies there. The only other reason someone came down there was to inspect the generator every 2 years. It was a small room of stone with a large metal construct on one side and a bunch of cleaning supplied on the other. On the metal generator, wedged between the generator and the wall where people couldn't see it unless they climbed on top of the thing, a green light flashed red and a quick charge was delivered to a sealed Kage. This Kage contained 5 Kages of explosive notes, the equivalent of a dozen military grenades. 1. The charge traveled into the Kage and set off each and every one of the notes simultaneously, resulting in an explosion that rocked the room and reduced the generator to so much scrap. The favorite phrase in the hospital for the next 10 seconds was, "What the fuck was that?" with Absalom. Absalom knew his time was short. He had to detonate the EMP and get out of there before ninjas started swarming around the village. He flicked the cover off of the blue switch and hit the button. An invisible field of magnetic energy surged from the small box and traveled through each and every machine in the area. Every last power generator was permanently deactivated. The low humming from the machines ceased. Across Konoha, the power went out, including the hospital. In a large cave in Taki no Kuni, a large statue sat in a large, open cave. It had 9 eyes that were currently open. One of those eyes had a pupil in it. Right now, a second pupil was forming in another of the eyes. A large red sphere sat in the statue's mouth. Kikukawa Yukino, the Rokubi Jinchuriki, fell to the ground, dead. On the hands of the statue, 9 figures stood. 7 of them were but mere holograms, while the other 2 were there physically. They all relaxed as they saw the iris form. The blonde one on the right index finger rubbed his left shoulder and said, "Man, that was a real pain, yeah." Most of the other figures nodded in agreement. The figure on the right thumb looked at the short man on the left thumb and said, "You are sure that you couldn't get anything out of her?" The short figure nodded and said, "Yes, Leader Sama." The shock of her friend's betrayal in conjunction with a not-too-stable psyche broke her mind. She simply shut down after she woke up. The Rokubi was starting to take over when we put her down again. We couldn't get anything from her. The leader of Akatsuki nodded and then looked to the man on the right ring finger of the statue, the one with the Sharingan eyes. The man said, "Itachi, we know where the Kyubi is hiding. I know that you are currently in southern Hai no Kuni. You are to travel north and attack his base in Kusa no Kuni immediately. Capture the Jinchuriki alive and kill everyone else there. And be sure to bring salt with you. If Sasori's information is correct, then it will be vital." Uchiha Itachi, murderer of the Uchiha clan, nodded calmly and said, "Yes, Leader Sama, at once." Then the figures faded out, one by one. The statue vanished in a gust of black smoke. The 2 members of Akatsuki that were physically there left the cave, detonating explosives inside, causing it to collapse. They went off, in search of the Ichibi, the only remaining target for the 2. They didn't have any leads, but they would work for however long they had to in order to find the one-tailed demon. Zetsu, having previously been ordered to hunt the Rokubi, is now hunting the Sanbai instead. Deidara was right about one thing though. Zetsu was pissed when he found out that his target had been stolen from him. In southern Hai no Kuni, 2 figures awoke from a seeming meditation. Itachi stood and merely said, "Let's get going, Kisame." Hoshigaki Kisame, one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist, stood up and took up his sword as he said, "Right." The 2 Akatsuki members headed north, toward the discovered location of Uzumaki Naruto, the Kyubi Jinchuriki. Thanks for watching, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. I have created a playlist of this what if where you guys can find all the parts. See you in the next video.